The sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden boardwalks, making the dust swirl around her boots with every step. She kept her head low, eyes on the cracked planks, but the laughter followed her anyway. "Watch where you're going, clumsy," a boy shouted, pointing at her as he ran past. She flinched, her fingers tightening around the faded hem of her dress. I'm sorry," she whispered, voice trembling. A shopkeeper leaned out of the saloon doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. "Always bumping into something, aren't you, girl?" he called. The men behind him chuckled, the sound rough against the quiet hum of the wind. "Maybe she's trying to trip everyone for fun," another voice added, cruel and sharp. She pressed her back against the wall, wishing she could vanish. Her cheeks burned, and she could feel her heart hammering under the plain cotton of her dress. Children nearby mimicked her walk, exaggerated steps and awkward sways, and she clenched her fists. "Stop it," she cried, but her voice was swallowed by the laughter. The pastor walked past, his face pale and tight, eyes briefly meeting hers. He gave a small shake of his head, as if regret could fix anything, and moved on. She exhaled shakily.
No one stopped them.
No one would. As she rounded the corner by the flour mill, disaster struck. A merchant stepped backward, carrying a sack, and it slipped from his arms. White powder burst into the air, landing over her head and shoulders. "Watch it," she gasped, stepping back, wiping flour from her eyes. The crowd erupted in laughter, some pointing, others slapping their thighs. "Well, ain't that perfect?" a woman cackled. "Looks like the flour chose her." She sank to her knees, shaking her head. "Please, I didn't mean to." "Mean to?" the merchant barked, his face red. "You're always a mess." Tears stung her eyes. She pressed her palms against her cheeks and stumbled down the street, boots scraping over the dusty planks. The whispers followed. "She's worthless, she's a fool, what a sight." Finally, she slipped out of the crowded street, ducking behind a row of skeletal trees that edged the riverbank. The water glittered under the sun, calm, reflective, and yet somehow distant. She sank to the ground, letting her head rest on her knees, and tried to steady her breathing. "You okay there?" a voice called from the shadows. She raised her head cautiously. A man on horseback, tall and quiet, watched from a distance. His hat shaded his eyes, but his gaze held no judgment. Just observation. Just stillness. I'm fine," she said softly, unsure whether she wanted him to leave or stay. "You don't look fine," he said. His voice was low, steady, carrying an ease that contrasted sharply with the harsh town. I can handle it," she whispered, almost to convince herself. He tilted his head slightly, considering her. "Doesn't seem that way. You don't belong to the street, not like that." Her eyes narrowed. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Something better," he said simply, and for a moment, the words were enough to still the ache in her chest. She glanced down at the river, fingers tracing lines in the sand. "Better," she repeated, letting the word linger. For years, she hadn't known it existed. He stayed silent, letting the wind carry the whispers of the town to him, untouched, distant. She looked back at him, curious despite herself. There was no mockery in his eyes. No cruel laughter, only patience. Her chest heaved, the weight of shame and humiliation settling heavier than the sun, but the quiet figure on horseback sparked something she had long forgotten. A flicker of trust, a hint of hope. The wind rustled the skeletal branches above her, and she wrapped her arms around her knees, staring at the distant cowboy. She didn't speak again. She just watched. The sun dipped lower behind the dusty buildings of the town, painting long shadows across the river. She was alone, yet not entirely. And for the first time that day, she allowed herself to wonder. Maybe there was someone who saw more than her mistakes. Maybe someone who could see her. The general store smelled of dried beans, leather, and dust. She stepped cautiously through the swinging doors, hoping to grab a few supplies and leave unnoticed. "Hold on there," the storekeeper said sharply, eyes narrowing. "Didn't you take that bolt of cloth yesterday?" I didn't," she stammered, stepping back. "I swear it wasn't me." "You expect me to believe that?" he barked, slamming a hand on the counter. I saw you near it. I was just walking by. She tried again, voice shaking. I didn't touch. You're lying, a man from the corner muttered. Always sneaking, always trouble. Her cheeks burned, and she looked down, pressing her hands to her apron. The sheriff appeared, tall and heavy-set, his boots thudding on the wooden floor. Miss, what's the meaning of this? He asked, glancing between her and the storekeeper. She tried to take something, the merchant said quickly, his finger stabbing toward her. I caught her right here. I didn't, she repeated, almost a whisper, but louder than she expected. I. The sheriff's brow furrowed, and he looked at the few townspeople who had gathered. Murmurs ran like a wind through the crowd. Enough, the sheriff said finally. We'll settle this outside. Hands gripped her shoulders, firm and unyielding. The front doors swung open, and the hot sun struck her like a blow. Dust clung to her skin. The crowd followed, eyes sharp and mouths whispering venomous words. Thief! Watch her hands, a voice yelled. Clumsy fool, another shouted. I can explain, please, she begged, tears pricking at the edges of her eyes. A pair of men from the town's security stepped forward. Move along, lady, one said, tone hard, guiding her out. She stumbled, boots scraping the dirt, and a coarse laugh followed her. Go back to the gutter where you belong. Her chest heaved. Her stomach churned. She wanted to vanish into the ground, to escape the relentless stares. But there was no escape here. Once she was a few blocks away, free from the crowd, yet still hearing the whispers, she ran without direction, the dirt road scorching her feet. Her lungs burned, and her dress clung uncomfortably to her back. Every glance over her shoulder made her heart jump. You're not safe here, she murmured to herself, voice swallowed by the wind. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. She had lost track, until the quiet figure appeared again. The cowboy from the riverbank waited on horseback, dust settling around his boots. You again, she said, voice wary. Why are you here? I thought you might need a place to stay, he said simply. His eyes held no mockery, only calm observation. A place stay. She laughed bitterly, wiping dust from her cheeks. I don't know you. I can't just trust you. You don't have much choice right now, he replied softly but not unkindly. The town isn't kind to you. I can offer shelter, food, and work. Nothing more unless you want it. Her fists clenched at her sides. The idea of accepting help felt foreign and wrong, yet the burning shame of the town chased her like a hound. She swallowed hard, the words stuck in her throat. I don't know if I can. You'll be safe, he said. And if you're willing, I can show you. Her gaze flicked from his face to the horizon. Dust swirled around them, the wind carrying the distant sounds of the town, mocking and cruel. She thought of nowhere else to go, no one else who could help. Slowly, hesitantly, she nodded. He dismounted, offering a hand. She hesitated, then took it, gripping tightly as he guided her toward the wagon. The horse beneath him snorted, lifting a hoof, but he remained steady, calm. The ride to the ranch was silent except for the creak of wheels and the clatter of hooves. Her heart pounded in her chest, but each moment of quiet helped a tiny fraction of her fear ease. She glanced at the cowboy beside her, noticing the calm steadiness of his posture, the way his eyes scanned the horizon, protective but not demanding. You always ride like this? She asked finally, voice soft. Not always, he said. But I've learned it's better to move slow when things are tense. Gives you time to think. She swallowed, considering how much thought she had given to running, hiding, and enduring the town's scorn. She realized, reluctantly, that she had never been able to think this clearly before. The ranch came into view, modest, sturdy, with a low barn and a fence stretching along the corral. The sun glinted off the tin roof, warm and welcoming. Here we are, he said. You can stay in the guest room. We'll eat soon. Then, if you like, I'll show you the chores. She dismounted, boots sinking into the soft dirt of the yard. Her hands trembled slightly as she brushed dust from her skirt. I thank you, she whispered, words almost foreign on her lips. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Just take a breath. You're safe now." She took one, slow and deep, letting the weight of the town's cruelty fall just a little. Fear still lingered, and distrust remained, but the tension loosened just enough to glimpse a faint possibility of relief. For the first time that day, she felt the thought of home without shame, or at least something approaching it. The cowboy watched quietly as she stepped toward the porch, uncertain but willing to try. And as she opened the door to the modest homestead, the sun slanted through the wooden beams, painting long shadows across the floor, welcoming her into the quiet, protective world he had offered. The barn smelled of hay, leather, and horse sweat, the creak of the loft overhead mixing with the low snorts and stomps of animals. She carried a bucket of water across the corral, her arms trembling slightly under the weight. "Careful with that," the cowboy said quietly from the gate, his eyes calm and watchful. "I can manage," she muttered, adjusting the handle, cheeks flushing. "Don't strain yourself," he said, not with command, but observation. He leaned on the fence, hat shading his eyes from the afternoon sun. She hesitated, then nodded, trying to keep her movements steady. The rhythm of the ranch was foreign yet oddly comforting. The swish of the lanterns in the barn, the low neigh of horses, the distant hum of cattle. "Here," he said after a moment, reaching out with a rough hand, steadying the bucket for her. Her fingers brushed his, warm and firm. "Thanks," she whispered, voice barely audible. "No need to thank me," he said. "Just do it right. The horses notice." She laughed softly, the sound foreign in her own ears. "Horses notice?" "They notice everything," he replied. "Patience counts more than strength here." She bent to fill the trough, feeling the water slosh against the wooden edges. He stayed near, silent but present, a quiet anchor in the chaos of unfamiliar work. She glanced at him, curiosity mixing with wariness. "Why are you helping me?" she asked cautiously. "Because it's right," he said simply. "And because you're not a danger to anyone here." Her hands froze mid-motion. She had spent so long surrounded by scorn and whispers, being treated like an intruder in every place she went. The simple declaration struck her like a bomb, though she didn't know how to respond. "Do you always speak like that?" she asked, drying her hands on her apron. "Only when it matters," he said, shrugging. His gaze swept the corral, checking the gates and the horses' postures. "Rest of the time, quiet works best." She nodded, absorbing the simplicity, the steadiness. The barn felt smaller somehow, safer somehow, with him present. "Next, we mend the fence," he said, handing her a hammer and nails. "That corner's loose." She bent to work, hammering with uneven strokes at first. "I don't know if I'm any good at this," she admitted. "You'll learn," he said quietly, adjusting a plank beside her. "Nothing's perfect first try." Hours passed in a gentle rhythm of work and sparse conversation. He offered advice, not commands. A pause here, a nod there, a quick hand to steady a post, and she felt a faint spark of confidence she hadn't known in years. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, he brought her a steaming cup of coffee. "Here," he said. "Warm hands, warm thoughts." She accepted it, feeling the heat seep into her fingers. "Thank you," she murmured, and she meant it, not out of obligation, but because it felt safe to do so. "You're welcome," he replied, voice even, no inflection of superiority. Night settled over the ranch, lanterns casting long, wavering shadows across the barn and corral. She carried a blanket he'd left on a bale of hay, tucking it around her shoulders. I don't usually sleep like this," she admitted, sitting on the haystack. "Then learn," he said softly. "You've earned a little comfort." She blinked back tears, realizing how strange it felt to be treated kindly without expectation or mockery. She had spent so long avoiding warmth, thinking it would only burn her in the end. "I used to. I mean, no one ever." Her voice broke, and she shook her head, embarrassed. "You don't have to explain," he said gently. "No one needs to know your past here." Her hands clenched around the blanket. She wanted to speak more, to unburden herself, but words felt fragile. The quiet strength beside her said more than words ever could. The next morning, the routine continued. She carried feed to the horses while he saddled one for work in the pasture. The air smelled fresh, tinged with grass, dirt, and early morning dew. "You handle the chestnut first," he instructed, nodding toward a tall mare. "She's skittish but smart." "Yes, sir," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her tone. "Not sir," he corrected with a small smile. Just call me by my name. Names are safer than titles here." She hesitated. "All right, okay," she said, choosing not to press further. By midday, she noticed subtle changes in herself. She walked with slightly straighter shoulders, her voice held a quiet confidence, and the horses seemed to respond differently, softer, more trusting. The cowboy noticed but said nothing, letting the progress speak for itself. "You're good with them," he remarked finally, almost casual. "Better than you think." She looked up from brushing a bay mare. "Really?" "Really," he said, eyes meeting hers with a steady weight that felt protective, almost gentle in its insistence. She exhaled, a sound that carried relief she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Maybe I am," she whispered, smiling faintly. The afternoon faded, and the ranch grew quiet. She sat on the porch later, sipping water, watching the lantern light flicker against the barn doors. The cowboy leaned against a fence, hat tipped low, observing the horses. "You're quiet tonight," she said, glancing at him. "I've said enough today," he replied. "Sometimes quiet is clearer than talking." She nodded slowly. Words had become easier since arriving, yet his example taught her that silence could carry safety and meaning too. "Thank you," she said finally, letting the gratitude linger without expectation. "You don't need to thank me," he said again, but this time there was a hint of warmth in his tone, a quiet encouragement. She wrapped the blanket tighter, looking out over the pasture, listening to the distant call of cattle and the soft rustle of the wind. For the first time since leaving the town, she felt a flicker of safety, a spark of dignity. The cruelty and whispers of the town were far away, and she realized that here, even small gestures, coffee, steady hands, a blanket, could rebuild more than she had thought possible. The night deepened, lanterns swaying gently, casting a warm glow across the quiet ranch. And as she closed her eyes for the first short rest, she allowed herself to believe, just a little, that she might belong somewhere after all. She walked along the riverbank, boots sinking slightly in the damp soil, her gaze fixed on the rippling water. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the skeletal trees lining the bank. Memories surfaced unbidden, each sharper than the last. "Call her names," a boy had whispered. "Fatso, Klutz, hopeless." She clenched her fists, heart hammering, and closed her eyes. The laughter of the town fair echoed, cruel and piercing. "Step aside, make room for the fool," someone had shouted. Hands had pointed, eyes had mocked, and the memory burned her cheeks even now. She sank to the ground, knees drawn to her chest. Why was I never enough?" she whispered, voice breaking in the quiet. "You've got a long way to go if you're asking that," a deep voice said softly. Her head snapped up. The cowboy stood a few feet away, hat tipped low, shadowed by the dying sunlight. He didn't step closer, didn't judge. He simply waited. I'm fine," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "You don't look fine," he replied. He lowered himself to sit beside her, careful not to crowd, letting the silence hold them both. She stared at the water, reflection wavering. "I keep seeing their faces," she admitted. "At the fair, at the store, everywhere. They laughed at me, pointed. I couldn't stop them. People often see what they want," he said quietly. "Doesn't mean it's the truth." Her eyes traced the river's edge. "It feels real. All of it. I can't forget." He nodded, still silent for a long moment. Then, almost casually, he said, "There was a young horse once. Found him alone, scared, his leg broken. Everyone said he'd never walk right again." She glanced at him, curiosity softening the edge of her grief. "What happened?" "I didn't do much. Fed him, watched him, let him rest. Took months. He stumbled, fell, but he kept getting up. One day, he ran without pain, without fear. Took a long time, but he healed. She exhaled slowly, the story settling around her. And you just waited? Watched. Some things need patience, he said. Some things can't be forced. You can't rush healing, whether it's a horse or a person. Her fingers traced the surface of the water, cold and fluid, shifting with every movement. I've been waiting, too. Not sure if I knew it. Or maybe I didn't know what to wait for. You waited for someone to see you, he suggested. For someone to stop the mockery, maybe. But that's not always how it works. Tears pricked her eyes, threatening to spill. She looked down, embarrassed. I was never wanted. Not by family, not by town. Always too much or not enough. Too loud, too clumsy, too fat. He didn't interrupt. His presence alone spoke volumes. No judgment, no pity, just steady support. I thought I'd feel smaller if someone helped me, she said finally. But I'm starting to feel lighter somehow. And it scares me. That's progress, he said softly. Small steps, day by day. Nothing has to be fixed all at once. She glanced at him, seeing not a stranger, but a quiet shield, someone who held the space for her pain without trying to erase it. You've helped more than you know, she whispered. He tipped his hat slightly, the hint of a smile brushing the corners of his mouth. Sometimes just sitting beside someone is enough. Sometimes that's all anyone needs. She exhaled, leaning back on her hands, staring at the river again. The water reflected the sky, streaked with gold and rose, and for a moment, the cruelty of the town felt distant. She allowed herself a small, fragile hope. I don't talk much, she admitted, voice low. Not to anyone. But I wanted to tell you some of it. Maybe because you don't laugh. Maybe because you just listen. I'm listening, he said, simple, steady. No interruptions, no judgment. Just listening. She smiled faintly, wiping a tear from her cheek. I forgot it could feel like this, someone not turning away, someone just letting you be. Not everyone's like the town, he said quietly. Some people see the truth beneath what others call flaws. Her gaze softened on the water's surface. I think I want to try believing that. Even a little. You don't have to rush it, he reminded her. Let it come slowly. The sun slipped lower, painting the river gold, streaking the trees with fire and shadow. She inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of old insults loosen just enough to breathe freely. The memory of laughter, pointing fingers, and cruel voices still lingered, but it didn't hurt as sharply. Not while he sat beside her, quiet and steady. Tomorrow, she murmured, maybe I can face the barn again. Maybe I can try to work without feeling broken. You will, he said simply. And I'll be there. Even if it's just in the corner, watching. That's enough sometimes. She leaned back, letting the blanket of dusk wrap around her shoulders, feeling the faintest flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Safety. Not complete, not permanent, but enough to hope. The river glimmered gold and orange, carrying the first signs of healing with it. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond the town's cruelty, a life where she could breathe without flinching, a life where dignity and hope could return. The cowboy remained silent, his presence steady, allowing her to claim that small victory for herself. And as the sun sank behind the horizon, the shadows of the past began to loosen their grip, letting in the warmth of a quiet, patient promise. The sun rose over the ranch, painting the wooden fences in gold. She stepped outside, brushing dust from her skirt, feeling the morning chill on her arms. Horses neighed softly in the corral, and the distant lowing of cows filled the air. You ready for today? The cowboy asked, voice calm, leaning against the fence post. I think so, she said, swallowing hard. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the anticipation of learning something new. Good, he said. First, we ride. You on the bay mare, Chestnut, steady and smart. She nodded, approaching the horse cautiously. She's bigger than I expected. Size doesn't matter, he said quietly. Confidence does. Trust her, and she'll trust you. Her palms pressed against Chestnut's flanks. The horse shifted beneath her touch, nostrils flaring, muscles coiling. Easy, she murmured. Easy now. You're doing fine, he said, voice low, almost a whisper. Keep your shoulders back. Look where you want to go. She nodded again, sliding onto the saddle. The horse snorted and stepped forward. She gripped the reins tightly. Relax, he said, walking beside her. Don't fight her movements. Flow with them. Chestnut trotted, then cantered, and she laughed nervously, the sound raw but genuine. I think I can do this. You can, he said, a faint smile brushing his lips. Good. Keep going. After the ride, she dismounted, knees wobbly, and he steadied her with a hand on her back. Not bad for your first time, he said. Thank you, she said, her voice quiet but sincere. The small gesture of support lifted her more than she expected. Next came the fences. She grabbed the hammer and nails, bending over a loose plank. Her hands fumbled at first, hitting her thumb with the hammer. Ouch, she exclaimed, dropping the tool. Here, he said, crouching beside her. His hand guided hers to the wood. Steady. Hammer straight. Watch your fingers. She followed his instructions, striking with more precision. Like this. Exactly, he said. He straightened and nodded, watching her progress. See? You're getting it. The plank was secured, and she stepped back, wiping sweat from her brow. I did it, she said, disbelief in her tone. You did, he replied quietly. Good work. By midday, she had milked cows, fed chickens, and repaired a section of fence. Each task left her tired but proud. She noticed how the cowboy observed quietly, never rushing her, never criticizing unnecessarily. A faint laugh escaped him when Chestnut spooked at a bird, and she found herself laughing too, lighter than she had in weeks. You're smiling, he said, leaning on the fence again. I am, she admitted, brushing sweat from her face. I think I like this. Being useful, I mean. You are useful, he said. More than you know. The afternoon sun dipped toward the horizon when dust clouds appeared at the edge of the ranch. Voices carried over the wind, sharp and mocking. Hey, what's she doing here? One man yelled. She doesn't belong, another called. She froze, heart thumping. Fear crawled up her spine as the voices grew louder, mingling with the harsh laughter of townspeople who had tormented her before. Stay calm, the cowboy said, stepping slightly in front of her, arms relaxed but ready. You're safe here. I don't want them to see me like this, she said, voice trembling. They won't, he assured her. Stand tall. Just stand tall. The men reached the fence line, pointing fingers, shouting accusations. Who let her in? One demanded. She's nothing but trouble, another sneered. She clenched her fists, the old fear prickling. But the cowboy's steady presence gave her courage. She took a deep breath, raising her chin. I am not nothing, she said, voice stronger than she expected. The men laughed, mockery dripping from every word. You? Ha! You're a joke. I may have been a joke to you, she said, but not here. Not anymore. The cowboy didn't speak. He simply stood beside her, silent strength backing her words. You think you can just come here? A man spat. I'm learning, she said. Learning to work. Learning to live. And I will not let your cruelty follow me here. The wind blew over the corral, carrying dust and whispers. The townspeople glared, unaccustomed to anyone standing firm, especially her. They muttered threats and insults but slowly backed away, the weight of her resolve reinforced by the cowboy's quiet vigilance. After they left, she sank onto the steps of the porch, knees drawn close. That was terrifying, she said, voice shaky but proud. You did well, he said, joining her. They'll think twice before coming back. I never thought I'd have the courage, she admitted. Not after everything. Courage isn't the absence of fear, he said. It's what you do even with fear in your chest. She looked at him, understanding dawning. The lessons of the ranch were not just about horses or fences. They were about standing firm, about claiming space that had been denied, about trusting in oneself and those who had earned that trust. "I feel different," she said softly. "Like I'm not the timid girl who ran from the town." "You're not," he said simply. "And you won't be again." The sun settled behind the hills, turning the sky orange and rose. She inhaled deeply, the smells of hay, earth, and animals grounding her. The fatigue in her muscles felt good, a reminder that she had accomplished something tangible. The cowboy's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a subtle reassurance. "I think I'm starting to belong," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "You do," he said quietly. "This is your place now, as much as anyone's." She smiled faintly, a weight lifting from her chest. For the first time, she recognized her own strength, the ability to face fear and cruelty, and the quiet joy of being useful, seen, and steady in her own right. The barn doors creaked as night fell, lanterns flickering to life, casting long shadows over the corral. She stood, brushing off her skirt, and looked out over the ranch, chest warm with a newfound sense of confidence. The town's whispers, though still lingering, felt distant, powerless against the quiet, steady rhythm of the ranch and the support of the cowboy by her side. Dust swirled along the edge of the ranch, carrying voices that cut through the calm of the afternoon. She paused mid-step, brushing hay from her hands, and squinted toward the fence. A group of townspeople had arrived, led by the merchant whose accusations had once haunted her in the general store. His family flanked him, eyes sharp, mouths twisted into sneers. "What's she doing here?" the merchant demanded, voice loud enough to carry across the corral. "She doesn't belong on your land," his son added, pointing at her as if she were some intruder. She swallowed, chest tightening. Fear gnawed at her, and for a moment, her hands trembled, loosening the bucket she had carried. I'm just helping," she said softly, voice barely rising above the taunts. "Helping," the merchant spat. "The troublemaker from town? You let her roam free?" She's nothing but trouble," his wife chimed in, eyes narrowing. She flinched at the words, the sting of familiar cruelty pressing against her heart. She had fled the town, escaped the laughter and the whispers, yet here it was again, carried on familiar voices. The cowboy stepped forward, shoulders squared, boots planted firmly in the dust. His gaze swept over the intruders, calm but unyielding. "She belongs here," he said firmly. "This is her work. This is her place, as much as anyone's. You have no right to speak otherwise." The merchant blinked, surprise flashing in his eyes. "And who are you two?" "I am the owner of this ranch," the cowboy interrupted, voice low, deliberate. "And I say she stays. Now leave, or face the consequences of overstepping your bounds." The townspeople exchanged uneasy glances. His calm authority carried weight. The air seemed to shift. They had expected fear, compliance, or at least hesitation from her. But she stood tall, quiet behind him, shoulders squared, eyes meeting theirs without flinching. She works hard," the cowboy continued, voice even. "She earns her place here every day. You will not insult her, nor question her presence." The merchant's jaw tightened. "We'll see if the town agrees," he muttered, spinning on his heel. His family followed, haughty and muttering, retreating along the dusty road. She exhaled slowly, chest heaving, as the tension drained away. I thought I'd always be afraid," she whispered. "You'll still feel fear," the cowboy said softly, stepping beside her. "That's not weakness. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's standing anyway." She nodded, glancing down at her hands. They were steady now, calloused slightly from work but unshaking. "I didn't think I'd ever have someone defending me like that," she admitted, voice low. "You've earned it," he said quietly. "Not because you asked, but because you've proven your worth." She turned back toward the corral, noticing the horses moving calmly, as though the animals sensed the absence of tension now. She walked among them, brushing a bay mare's neck gently. "It feels different here," she murmured. It should, he replied. This place is meant to be safe. For you, for anyone willing to work and respect it. She smiled faintly, the warmth spreading slowly through her chest. The town's whispers were still there, distant echoes at the edges of the ranch, but they no longer carried power. She had allies now, and a safe haven. Do you ever worry they'll come back? She asked quietly, running a hand along the mare's smooth coat. Perhaps, he said, but courage isn't in fearing what might happen. It's in how you face it when it does. She nodded, absorbing the words, feeling the weight of them settle into her bones. The wind shifted, carrying dust and the faint scent of hay, and she felt herself grounded, connected to the ranch, the horses, and the cowboy beside her. I don't feel small anymore, she said softly. Even when they try to scare me. You shouldn't, he replied. You've worked too hard, learned too much, and shown more strength than most people ever notice. Her gaze swept over the corral, watching the horses nuzzle each other and stomp in the dust. She saw the simplicity of the ranch life, the quiet rhythm of work and care, and it filled her with a sense of belonging she had never known in the town. Thank you, she murmured, more to herself than to him. He didn't respond immediately, simply standing a step back, letting her space and presence speak for themselves. Then, quietly, he said, keep going. Tend to the horses. Learn the rhythm. That's how you grow stronger. That's how you stay safe. She bent to refill the troughs, hands steady and purposeful. Her movements were confident now, deliberate, each task reinforcing the knowledge that she was no longer the timid girl who had fled the town in shame. The whispers of the past lingered faintly in her mind, but they no longer commanded attention. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the corral. She brushed a bay mare's mane, feeling the warmth in her chest spread steadily. Her gaze remained unflinching, eyes clear, shoulders squared, even as the distant murmur of the town echoed faintly at the fence line. You're doing well, the cowboy said, voice low, almost a whisper. Keep tending, keep learning. That's what matters. She exhaled slowly, watching the horses move in calm harmony. I think I can, she said, voice steady, carrying more conviction than she had felt in years. You can, he said, turning toward the barn, then glancing back briefly. And you will. One day, no one will be able to shake that. She nodded, chest swelling with a quiet pride. The town's cruelty had tried to define her, but here, on the ranch, she was building her own life, her own dignity, her own strength. The wind rustled the fence posts, carrying the last echoes of the merchant's insults away. She bent to fill a water bucket, hands firm, heart steady. The cowboy remained near, silent and steady, a quiet pillar of protection. For the first time in her life, she realized she had allies. She realized that moral courage existed outside the town's tyranny. And as she looked out over the corral, tending the horses, she felt a flicker of something she had never known before: safety, belonging, and a place to call her own. The morning sun warmed the garden as she bent over the soil, hands dark with earth. Tiny green shoots pushed through, stubborn and delicate. She paused, wiping her brow, and smiled faintly. You've got a good touch, the cowboy said from the porch, hat tipped low, eyes on her. I think they'll grow, she replied, brushing a clump of dirt from her apron. If I don't kill them first, he chuckled softly. They'll manage. You'll manage. Patience, that's the key. I'm learning patience, she said, voice lighter than it had been in weeks. She planted another row of seeds, careful and deliberate, feeling a quiet pride in each movement. Later, she carried a loaf of freshly baked bread toward the barn, warm and fragrant. A small child peeked from behind the corral fence, wide-eyed and hesitant. Would you like some? She asked gently, holding out the bread. The child nodded, steps cautious. Thank you, he whispered, taking it carefully. You're welcome, she said softly, smiling. The warmth of his acceptance spread through her chest, a small but significant balm for the old wounds that still lingered. The cowboy leaned on the fence, observing, a faint smile on his face. See? Small acts matter more than you realize. She glanced at him, brushing a few crumbs from her hands. It feels good, giving. Like I can be useful without fear. You are, he said simply. Every day. That's how trust and healing grow, step by step, gesture by gesture. After the chores, she helped brush the horse's manes, working methodically, fingers tangling in soft hair. Chestnut nuzzled her shoulder occasionally, and she laughed quietly. You two are becoming friends, he said, voice low and calm. I think so, she replied, brushing a particularly stubborn tangle. I never thought I'd enjoy this, caring for something else. Something living that trusts me. You'll learn, he said quietly, and you'll teach it patience in return. That's the way of it. As the evening settled, lanterns were lit across the porch and barn. Shadows danced on the walls, warm and flickering. They sat together, the air thick with quiet understanding. Do you ever regret the past? She asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant. Sometimes, he admitted, eyes on the horizon. But it doesn't define me. We carry what we need to learn from. Nothing more. She nodded slowly, the words sinking in. I'm learning that too. That the pain doesn't have to own me anymore. He glanced at her, a faint nod of approval. Good. That's the first step. After a pause, he reached into the saddlebag beside him and pulled out a worn shawl, threadbare at the edges but soft and sturdy. Here, he said, handing it to her. It's not much, but it'll keep you warm. And maybe remind you that you're not alone. She accepted it, fingers brushing his. Thank you, she whispered, voice catching. The shawl smelled faintly of hay and leather, familiar and comforting. She draped it around her shoulders, feeling the warmth settle over her like a shield. You'll need it more than you think, he said gently. Some nights are colder than others, even here. She smiled faintly, letting the comfort sink in. I think it will help. Days passed in this quiet rhythm. She baked bread for visiting families, tended the garden, and helped with the children. Each act felt small but meaningful. She watched a little girl chase a chicken, laughing, and felt a swell of contentment in her chest. You're changing, the cowboy said one evening, leaning against the barn post. Do you notice? I think so, she admitted, eyes on the setting sun. I don't feel invisible. Or afraid. Not all the time. That's good, he said softly. It's a start. Healing is quiet, steady, not sudden. She nodded, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. It's hard sometimes. The memories, the shame, they linger. I know, he said gently. But every day you choose to care, to act, to trust, they lose a little power. She looked at him, eyes softening. I didn't know anyone could be steady like you. Quiet and patient. Not demanding, not judging. That's the way to do it, he said. One gesture, one act at a time. That's how you build strength. That's how trust grows. She wrapped the shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the warmth seep into her skin. The lantern light reflected off her hair, painting the barnyard in gold and amber. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel safe without fear or shame. You think I could ever be like that? She asked softly, voice barely above the flicker of the lanterns. Maybe, he said quietly. You've already begun. Every act you take, every kindness you offer, you build yourself stronger. You just don't notice it yet. She smiled genuinely, the first real smile in what felt like forever. The shadows of the barnyard stretched long, the day's work done, and the air filled with the soft murmurs of animals settling for the night. I feel whole, somehow, she admitted, looking down at her hands, darkened with soil and flour, yet steady and capable. You are, he said, and it only grows from here. The children's laughter drifted faintly from the porch, a reminder of life continuing around her. She adjusted the shawl once more, feeling its weight and warmth, and let herself breathe deeply, savoring the quiet satisfaction of a day well lived. Tomorrow, we'll check the fence lines again, he said, voice low. And maybe plant more seeds. The garden's growing nicely. She nodded, eyes on the fading sunlight. I'm ready, she said, determination threading through her words. The lanterns flickered as night descended, painting the barnyard in soft light. She stood beside the porch, shawl wrapped around her shoulders, watching Chestnut nuzzle the foal in the corral. The wind carried the faint scent of earth and hay, steady and comforting. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile fully, unguarded and genuine, as the sunset stretched long shadows across the barnyard. The cowboy stood nearby, silent and patient, letting her claim her peace and warmth. The healing, she realized, was not sudden, but it was real, steady, and hers. Dust swirled along the main street as she walked, boots scuffing the boards, eyes fixed straight ahead. Whispers followed her, rising and falling like wind through dry grass. The townspeople watched from doorways, some curious, others sneering. She thinks she can just waltz back here? A merchant's wife muttered, folding her arms tightly. She's still the same fool, a man added, voice laced with derision. She felt the sting of their eyes, the weight of remembered ridicule, but she held her head high. I'm not here to argue, she said calmly, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. A group of boys jeered from the corner, mimicking her gait and calling out nicknames she had long tried to forget. Klutz. Fatso. You'll have to do better than that, she replied, lips pressed together in a faint, controlled smile. Her composure surprised even herself. A merchant, red-faced and angry, stepped forward. Do you have any right being here? This is a respectable town. I have as much right as anyone, she said clearly. I came here because it's where I need to be. Not to please you, not to cower before your judgments. The cowboy stood a few steps behind her, hands resting lightly on the saddle of his horse, eyes calm, unwavering. He said nothing, letting her voice carry the weight of her resolve. Listen to her talk, one man whispered to another. She thinks she's better than us now. She's braver than you'll ever be, she said, voice rising just enough to draw attention. I've faced fear. I've faced your cruelty. And I will not bend to it again. A hush fell over the crowd, some shifting uncomfortably, realizing her confidence was no act. You think a woman like you can stand firm? Another voice sneered from the saloon doorway. I think a person who has learned their worth can, she replied, stepping forward slightly, eyes locked on his. And I am learning every day. The merchant's wife scowled. You think this cowboy protects you? That he'll shield you from everything. He doesn't shield me from life, she said quietly. He teaches me to stand in it. That is the difference. The boys fell silent, exchanging glances. Even the merchant hesitated, caught off guard by her calm authority. You're unafraid, the cowboy said finally, voice low, just enough for her to hear. And that makes all the difference. I've had to be, she admitted softly. I've had no choice. A tense moment stretched over the street. The town seemed to hold its breath, witnessing someone they had tried to humiliate step forward with dignity and poise. From the saloon, a group of local men laughed, attempting to cut the tension with mockery. Look at her, thinking she belongs here, one said loudly. She's changing the rules, the cowboy muttered under his breath, tone calm, like water flowing over stone. I don't need rules from you, she replied, her voice carrying across the street. I make my own, as anyone should. The merchant's face reddened with frustration, but he said nothing, realizing the confrontation had shifted. The crowd's energy had changed. Curiosity replaced ridicule, some respect hidden beneath cautious expressions. You speak boldly, the cowboy said quietly to her.
Good. Keep your voice steady.
That is your shield. I feel steady, she admitted, glancing at him with a faint smile. Stronger than I ever imagined. Strength comes from within, he said, voice calm and assured. You've shown it here today. The whispers from the saloon grew as the townspeople began to speculate, trading quiet warnings. We can't let her think she wins, one muttered. She's turning the town against itself. Another said, lips tight with anger. We need a plan. She overheard fragments of their plotting but remained composed, eyes scanning the street, noting every gesture, every shift in stance. Fear no longer governed her movements. She felt the surge of something long buried, quiet confidence tempered with vigilance. You're not alone, the cowboy reminded her, stepping close enough for her to feel the calm presence. And you won't be. I know, she replied softly. I feel it. For the first time, I feel it. The afternoon light waned, casting long shadows across the boardwalks and buildings. She adjusted the shawl the cowboy had given her, the worn fabric now a symbol of her resilience, warmth, and protection. They'll plot, he said quietly, eyes scanning the horizon. People who fear change always do. But they cannot undo what you've built inside yourself. I've built it for myself, she said firmly, and no one can take that away. The merchant's family lingered at the edge of the street, eyes narrowed, mouths pursed. They muttered threats under their breath, plotting schemes she could not yet see. But the tension, rather than weakening her, only strengthened her resolve. I think they're scared, she said, voice low but firm, a small spark of satisfaction in her tone. They should be, he said quietly. Not because of fear alone, but because you've claimed your dignity. That unsettles those who thrive on cruelty. She watched the shadows stretch across the town, feeling the wind carry the faint scent of dust and distant pine. Her gaze remained steady, unflinching, fixed on the saloon where whispers turned into hushed plotting. I'm ready for whatever comes next, she said softly, speaking both to herself and the cowboy beside her. You will be, he replied. And when they attempt to challenge you again, remember this moment. Your voice, your composure, your courage, they all matter more than their cruelty ever could. The sun dipped lower, casting gold and rose across the buildings, long shadows crawling across the boardwalk. The town stirred with unease, whispering, scheming, unaware that the moral reckoning approaching would not be so easily avoided. She adjusted her shawl, shoulders squared, eyes steady. The townspeople might plot, might mock, but she now carried something no one could strip away: dignity, self-respect, and a quiet courage bolstered by steadfast support. The cowboy remained a silent guardian, patient and watchful, letting her claim her space in the street. She inhaled deeply, chest steady, heart resolute, knowing that tomorrow would bring challenges, and that she would meet them without fear. The town's whispers echoed faintly, but she no longer flinched. She had discovered her strength, and for the first time in years, felt that she truly belonged, not in their approval, but in her own right. The town square buzzed with chatter, voices carrying over the wooden boardwalks. She stood near the center, hands clasped tightly at her waist, jaw firm, eyes steady. The sun glinted off windows and horse tack, casting long shadows across the dusty street. Townspeople gathered, curious and hostile, whispers slicing through the air like wind over dry grass. Is this the woman we were talking about? One merchant sneered, stepping forward. Yes, another said, smirking. The troublemaker who thinks she can show up and pretend she belongs. She inhaled slowly, steadying her nerves. I belong, she said calmly. Her voice carried across the square, clear and measured. I belong by standing for what is right, not by cowering to cruelty. Laughter rose from the crowd, sharp and mocking. Right? You're joking, a man spat, stepping closer. A flicker of doubt nudged her chest, but then she felt the familiar presence at her side. The cowboy's boots scuffed lightly against the dirt. His gaze was steady, unwavering. She speaks the truth, he said, voice low but firm. And she will be treated with the respect anyone deserves. The merchant's son scoffed. Who's going to stop us? You? I won't stop her, the cowboy said calmly. I'll stand with her. That's all she needs. The townspeople shifted uncomfortably, realizing this confrontation would not follow their usual script. She straightened, shoulders squared, letting the quiet support behind her reinforce her courage. Fine, the merchant said, trying to reclaim dominance. Then let's see who owns what in this town. Let's see if she has any right to speak. At that moment, the sheriff, a stoic man with a lined face, stepped forward. If there's going to be any discussion, he said, voice carrying, it will be civil. And it will be fair. Whispers and mutters erupted. The merchant's wife huffed. Civil?
Ha!
She doesn't deserve. Enough, the sheriff said firmly, cutting her off. Let the record speak. A clerk handed a bundle of papers to the cowboy, who then stepped forward, offering them to her. She took them, hands steady, and opened the documents. One by one, she revealed the truth: property deeds, contracts, and records bearing her name, establishing her rightful ownership of land and resources the town had long assumed were inaccessible to her. Is this? The merchant stammered, eyes widening. Yes, she said, voice calm, unwavering. These papers prove what I have earned and what is rightfully mine. No rumors, no gossip, no cruelty can change that. The town murmured, disbelief spreading. Faces paled. Some avoided her gaze entirely. You can't, the merchant exclaimed, voice cracking. These don't mean anything. They mean everything, she said softly, glancing at him with measured eyes. They mean that cruelty cannot define a person. They mean that justice is real when we choose to see it. A silence fell over the square, thick and heavy. Even the children who had followed the edges of the crowd stood still, sensing the weight of the moment. You speak boldly, the cowboy said quietly, just enough for her to hear. Good. Keep your voice clear. It's stronger than their insults. I've learned to speak, she replied, eyes scanning the crowd. To be heard.
To be seen.
To claim what is mine without fear. The merchant's family shifted, angry and flustered, but the authority of truth pressed down upon them. The sheriff's gaze lingered on the papers, nodding slowly, acknowledging that justice had finally taken a tangible form. You can't just show up and take. Another voice began, but she raised a hand, gently, stopping them. No, she said firmly. I do not take. I claim what is mine through effort, patience, and resilience. I have faced humiliation, cruelty, and ridicule. And I have survived. Not by revenge, not by anger, but by standing tall and letting truth guide me. She paused, letting her words sink in, eyes steady on the merchant and his family. The crowd was silent now, caught between old prejudices and the undeniable clarity of her voice. And to those who doubted me, she continued, I offer no bitterness. Only this: cruelty cannot bind a person who chooses dignity, who works with honesty, and who believes in the quiet power of right. A few brave townsfolk stepped forward, clapping softly, hesitant at first. Their applause spread slowly, deliberate, a ripple against the heavy tension. She met their eyes with a faint, grateful smile, acknowledging the small but meaningful acknowledgement of her triumph. The cowboy's hand rested lightly on the papers, then at his side. He said nothing, allowing her to command the moment, to claim her victory without overshadowing it. You've changed the town, he whispered gently, voice calm and approving. I've only claimed what belongs to me, she replied softly. The town, it will learn, eventually, that cruelty has consequences. The merchant's son gawked, muttering under his breath. This isn't fair. Fairness isn't given, she said quietly, voice firm. It is built through courage, patience, and truth. Today, we built it together. The sheriff stepped closer, placing a hand on the merchant's shoulder. The records are clear. Her claim is valid. That ends the argument. Some murmurs persisted, but the majority of the crowd fell silent, the reality settling over them like dust after a storm. They had been confronted not with anger, but with calm authority and undeniable truth. She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of weeks, months, years lift slightly. She had faced her public humiliation, stood her ground, and let morality speak louder than ridicule. The applause continued, growing, a slow but certain tide of acknowledgement from those willing to see justice done. The cowboy remained at her side, silent and steady. He did not smile, but the warmth in his eyes spoke volumes, a quiet pride in her courage, a recognition of her journey, and a reassurance that she was not alone. I never thought I'd feel this, she whispered, voice low but steady. This peace. This acknowledgement. You earned it, he said simply. Step by step, day by day. And today, the world around you is beginning to reflect that. She adjusted the shawl around her shoulders, the worn fabric now a symbol not only of warmth and protection but of resilience and quiet triumph. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the boardwalks and the town square. She felt the steady rhythm of truth, justice, and dignity surrounding her, anchoring her in a way that cruelty never could. The applause slowed, then ceased, leaving a hush thick with reflection. The townspeople looked to one another, confronted with the moral reckoning they had avoided for so long. The merchant's face burned red with anger and shame, unable to refute what they had seen. She met the sheriff's gaze, offering a calm nod of acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded in return, eyes lined with respect. "It was deserved," he replied. The cowboy leaned slightly closer, whispering, "The hardest battles are over. The rest is yours to keep." She exhaled, shoulders relaxing, and allowed herself a small, genuine smile. For the first time, she felt the full measure of her dignity restored, a slow, deliberate triumph over cruelty, fear, and public humiliation. The town square remained silent for a moment, but the moral victory was unmistakable. The applause would echo in whispers and private conversations, but she no longer needed side was a reminder. Strength comes not from anger or retaliation, but from dignity, courage, and the unwavering power of truth. The morning air was crisp as she walked among the horses, fingers brushing the warm coats, chest rising with steady breaths. A child followed behind, laughing softly as she mimicked her careful steps. "You're getting faster," she said, smiling down at the boy. "Careful now, don't startle him." "I won't," he replied, eyes wide and earnest. The cowboy rode up quietly, boots resting in the stirrups, hat tipped low. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. His steady gaze conveyed trust, respect, and patience. "You've changed," he said finally, voice low, just enough for her to hear. "I have," she admitted, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I don't feel the fear I used to. Not every day." He nodded once, a faint smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Good. You earned that." A mare nuzzled her shoulder, and she laughed softly, the sound light and unburdened. "I've learned to care without being afraid. To stand without shrinking. To claim what's yours," he finished quietly, watching her, letting her realize the full weight of her progress. She straightened, shoulders back, eyes scanning the barnyard. Workers moved among stalls, children played under careful eyes, and the animals shifted calmly, sensing the harmony in the space. She had built this balance, piece by piece, day by day. "Do you ever think about the town?" she asked softly, turning toward him. "Sometimes," he said. "But their opinions don't define you anymore. You've learned to walk in your own worth." She nodded, letting the words settle. "I can see now that fear used to rule me because I let it. But here, I've found strength I didn't know I had." He lifted his gaze to the horizon, eyes narrowing slightly against the sun. "That strength is steady. You'll carry it wherever you go." She glanced at the children playing nearby, the sunlight glinting on their hair. "I've never felt like this part of something. Part of a family. Even when I feared rejection, I've finally found belonging." "You've built it," he said softly, "through courage, patience, and small acts that mattered more than you realized." Later, she moved to the barn, hands steady as she lifted a lantern from its hook. The light flickered across the worn wood, painting gold and amber hues across the rafters. She held it high, eyes catching the glow, and for a moment, the quiet warmth seemed to settle into her chest. "This feels right," she whispered, voice barely above the lantern's soft crackle. "Because it is," he replied, leaning against the doorway. "You've restored what was lost. Step by step. Day by day." She allowed herself a full breath, letting the warmth of the lantern fill more than the barn. The glow reflected in her eyes, a mirror of the resilience and hope she had reclaimed. "Do you think the town will ever understand?" she asked, voice thoughtful, tracing patterns on the lantern glass. "They may not," he said, voice calm, patient. "But understanding isn't necessary anymore. You've reclaimed yourself, and that's all that matters." She set the lantern down carefully, its soft light spreading across the floor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. A sense of peace threaded through her chest, steady and unwavering. She stepped back outside, the wind carrying the faint scent of earth and hay. The plains stretched wide before her, open and endless, rolling in gentle hills bathed in late afternoon sun. "Look at that," she murmured, voice soft, almost to herself. "All of it open. Free." The cowboy rode alongside, silent and patient, eyes forward. No words were necessary. The trust and quiet understanding between them filled the space, as steady as the wind brushing across the grasses. "I never imagined I'd feel this," she admitted, voice low, steady. "Not fear, not shame, but calm. Hope. Freedom. You've earned it," he said simply. "And it will grow, the longer you walk your path." She adjusted the shawl around her shoulders, feeling its worn softness against her skin. It had traveled with her from uncertain beginnings to this wide-open moment, a talisman of protection, warmth, and quiet strength. The children waved as they ran past, laughing, and she waved back, smiling genuinely. The horses neighed softly, grazing without fear or tension. The ranch, once a place of tentative beginnings, was now home, full of life, order, and the balance she had fought to achieve. "Do you ever get tired?" she asked quietly, turning toward him. "Not of this," he said, eyes on the horizon. "Not when it's steady and true. You'll find the same, eventually." She laughed softly, letting the sound carry across the plains, mingling with the wind. "Steady and true. I like that." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ridge. She climbed a small rise at the edge of the pasture, boots sinking slightly into soft soil. The plains stretched before her, endless, bathed in the colors of sunset, gold, rose, and amber. She breathed deeply, the wind tugging gently at her hair and shawl, carrying the scent of the land, the warmth of the ranch, and the quiet strength of all she had endured. "I've come a long way," she said softly, voice steady, eyes bright. "From fear to this. Freedom, safety,
Dignity.
and you'll continue," he said, riding up beside her, his presence calm and steady. "Step by step, day by day. The world may never fully understand, but that doesn't matter." She turned to him, smiling, eyes reflecting the fading light. "It doesn't. Not anymore." The wind carried the soft rustle of grasses and the faint murmurs of animals settling in for the night. She raised her head, chest steady, shoulders squared, feeling the full measure of peace and quiet triumph. The cowboy's hand rested lightly on the reins, silent support, never intrusive. She glanced at him once more, grateful, then turned back to the horizon, letting the vast openness fill her. Her heart was calm, her mind clear, and for the first time, fully, she belonged to herself, to this land, and to the steady rhythm of life she had fought to claim. The lantern in the barn glowed warmly behind her, a symbol of light regained. The plains stretched endlessly before her, wind tugging gently at her shawl. She stood tall on the ridge, letting the sunset paint the world in gold, rose, and amber, knowing that the journey from fear and humiliation to hope and moral justice had come full circle. And for the first time in years, she felt the quiet, unshakable truth of freedom. She had reclaimed herself.